Hey Grace Church, my name is Josh. Welcome to the weekly for the week of June 26th. Today we are talking about Jesus and hypocrisy. So up until this point in the story of the book of Mark, we have seen Jesus do a lot of things, but we haven't heard a lot of teaching from Jesus. And in Mark chapter 7, we get an interaction between Jesus and the Pharisees where he does a significant amount of teaching. And here's what's crazy. The Pharisees, this religious group of leaders, they travel 90 miles from Jerusalem, the capital, to find Jesus because all the mounting enthusiasm, mounting following had got on their radar. So they traveled 90 miles to meet Jesus, and their complaint to him is that his disciples don't wash their hands before they eat. And they're defiling themselves, which isn't actually a law of God, but it's rather a regulation that has been added on top of God's law. But that's their accusation against Jesus. Your disciples don't wash their hands, and we need you to know that that's your responsibility, and you now have like a blemish against you because of how your disciples are acting. So this story, it shows us that there's a second enemy Jesus is primarily opposed to. The first one being Satan and demons, and we've seen those interactions. But now you get to see again the Pharisees, the scribes, the religious leaders are setting themselves up against Jesus as his opposition. And here's what's interesting. Jesus loves them and he's for them, but he is not in any way for what they are producing in the world, because they have a way of adding to God's law and binding people to a set of regulations that God doesn't bind people to. And so what this is called is legalism. Legalism is where you major in the minors, you bind people to things that God never binds them to, and you have this tendency to add to God's law things that you feel like people should be doing that they're never, you never see this in the Bible that they should or shouldn't be doing. So human tradition above God's law, that's legalism. And Jesus confronts these Pharisees and he calls them hypocrites. He says, you honor me with your lips, but your hearts are far from me. Externally, you look a certain way, but inwardly, you have no desire to uphold the law of God. You would rather put standards on others so that you have the power and you have the control instead of actually living out a life internally that has been transformed by God's law. And Jesus confronts them and calls them hypocrites for that. And so that same temptation that the Pharisees had is the same temptation that we struggle with today. And this is challenging, but here's the truth. That in the church, there are two kinds of people, and it is nearly impossible to distinguish them from the outside. So in other words, you could totally just be going through the religious motions and never really experience internal heart change. And that's not the design that God has for us. So we look out in the world and we really can't find like who has a heart that loves God and who has a heart that is faking it. So that's just what's happening in the world. But the second truth is we can't hide from God. Though we may be able to fake it to those around us, there's no way that we can hide what's really going on from God. And so the kind of people who have hearts that have been transformed by Jesus, not just lips that say they love Jesus, ultimately the closer they get to God and his grace, the greater that they are offended by sin in their own life and pushed away from sin in their own life, and the greater grace they give to sinners around them. But what the Pharisees were doing is they gave themselves a lot of grace, and then they were very difficult to those around them, giving no grace to others, ultimately causing a lot of hurt. And I think you can be honest and say that we've seen that in the life of the church throughout history. This whole deconstruction movement is oftentimes built around the church being judgmental to those, or being harsh to those, or not being gracious to people in their sin, all the while pretending to be perfect in their own way. And Jesus has something to say to that. He does not want us to be hypocrites. So as a church, we want to be people that say, Jesus, we love you with our lives and our hearts and our actions, not just with our words. We're not pretending, we're not acting, we're not hypocrites, but we're actually trying to draw near to you internally, be transformed by you internally, not just pretend that we love you externally. And that's certainly a challenge because oftentimes following rules and doing a set of a list of things can look more like following Jesus than actually loving him internally and being transformed by him. So here's the last thing we said. Jesus isn't interested in external behavior modification. Jesus is interested in transforming what you desire. He's interested in transforming what you love. And he wants your heart to love him so that then your words will be consistent with what's going on in your heart. And I know for many of us that lands all over the place, so I look forward to the conversation that this produces in house church. Here, as you're starting, here's the question for you. If you're a rule breaker or if you're a rule follower, this may land in different ways. But for this conversation, what if we started by asking the question, what is one rule that you love to break? A rule that you say, I'm willing to break that rule all the time. Start that as a conversation, and then your leader will take it away from there.